So I'm ready to go. So thanks for this opportunity to have a little discussion. I hate the word debate, and I probably shouldn't have put the words versus in there. You know, it shouldn't be a contest or a battle. It should just be an exchange of ideas and a search for the truth. So let's get underway and start off with the book of Genesis. Chapter 1, verse 11 and 12 say God created grass, herbs and fruit trees from the dry land. Verse 23 says God created whales, moving sea creatures and fowl, presumably all birds, I don't know, from the water. And verse 24 and 25 says God created cattle, creeping things and beasts from the dry land. And verses 26, 27 say God created man and woman from the dry earth. Don't have to be much of a biologist to realize that there are great swathes of the panoply of organisms that inhabit the earth that are completely missing from that account. But leaving that aside for the moment, the question we got to ask is, how did God do this? And the book of Genesis doesn't tell us, just says he spoke and things happened. It doesn't say what language he spoke, so we have to assume that it was magic. Moving on to chapter 2 of the book of Genesis, says on verse 7 that God created man from the dust of the ground. So pretty complicated life form being created from ground up rock. God created Eve from one of Adam's ribs. And that's pretty much all we get about creation of life in chapter 2, and it doesn't tell us how. But these things are pretty much contradict what established science says is possible. So once again, we have to assume God did it all by magic. So if we're going to accept the account of Genesis, we have to accept that magic, that is, actions that lie outside the laws of physics, are possible and actually happened. That no explanation is provided or required for the presence of fir trees, ginkgos, ferns, horsetails, mosses, liverworts, aquatic plants, and perhaps more. I can't see all of my screen here because I've got a little thing. I'm going to hide it up in the corner. And also, no explanation is provided or required for the presence of viruses, non-motile bacteria, many single-celled animals and plants, all fungi, sedentary sea creatures, and perhaps many more. I've been kind of generous here saying that creeping things would include motile bacteria. But the worst thing about this whole account is that it is utterly unscientific. It can never be tested or falsified. Not because it's correct, but because whatever mankind discovers that appears to contradict Genesis, the same answer can always be given: God did it using magic. And it's simply not possible to argue against that, because you can just say God did it and made things that way. As I say, it's completely unscientific, and so I was a little surprised to find these two sentences on Kent Hovind's website saying they utilize simple scientific explanations and all the available scientific evidence. If you're sticking to the book of Genesis and the Bible, it's pretty difficult to imagine how you're using science. So what about abiogenesis? Can abiogenesis offer a better explanation than the book of Genesis for the origin of life on Earth? Well, first of all, what is abiogenesis? It's the scientific hypothesis or collection of hypotheses that life can originate from complex organic chemistry without the intervention of an intelligence. Is abiogenesis even possible? Well, the honest answer to that question is I don't know. And I'll go further, nobody knows. But scientists are trying to find out. Did abiogenesis actually happen on Earth? And again, the honest answer is I don't know, and nobody else knows either. But scientists think it might have happened on Earth, and they're trying to find out whether it did happen. So why do scientists think abiogenesis might have happened on the early Earth? Well, all known life appears to be just chemistry. Now, if you disagree with that, Kent, then I challenge you to show me a life process that has been understood, that has not been explained in terms of just chemistry. Why do scientists think abiogenesis might have happened on the Earth? Well, the second reason is the chemicals of life could all have been present on the early Earth. Obviously, we're looking back into history before, well, even by your terms, 6,000 years possibly, or in our eyes, much, much longer. And it's difficult to know exactly what the conditions were, but we can get some pretty good clues, and it looks very much like amino acids and nucleotide bases, sugars and lipids were all could all have been formed on the early Earth in various locations where the conditions were right for those sort of reactions to happen. The third bit of evidence, the reason why scientists think abiogenesis might have happened, is the discovery of ribozymes. These are RNA molecules that also have catalytic activity, and they include the ribosome itself, which the RNA is actually the catalytic center of protein synthesis, not the proteins of the ribosome. And these molecules are capable of catalyzing reactions, and even in some cases of at least partial self-replication, if not complete self-replication, and who knows what kind of ribozymes will be found in the future. And the fourth piece of evidence is the discovery that micelles and bilayers can form, grow and divide by purely natural processes, providing a mechanism by which something that is similar to a cell but not actually a living cell could have developed on the early Earth, and provided a mechanism for generating actual living cells given enough time and appropriate conditions. So, quick summary. I know I've overshot my time here, but I hadn't planned to actually do this live, but hey ho. The book of Genesis offers no explanation of how life on Earth began, just that God did it somehow by magic. There's a complete reliance on the supernatural or magic. Many clades and kingdoms of animals are not even mentioned in this account. It's completely untestable, unverifiable, unfalsifiable, and therefore completely unscientific. Abiogenesis is far from a done deal or perfect. It's only a hypothesis or collection of hypotheses at present, and it's extremely challenging scientifically. It would be even if the Earth were only 6,000 years old. Looking back 6,000 years ain't that easy. But the idea of abiogenesis and the research done is based on genuine observation and experiment and not magic. It might lead one day to a correct explanation for the origin of life on Earth. And even if it doesn't do that, it's likely to lead to a much better understanding of biology, and it could even provide evidence that the Genesis account is correct. Whether it's possible and whether life did originate by abiogenesis or not. And that's my opening.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate that, Ken. Just put my slide up there if you would, Steve. Okay. Got to push a few buttons. There we go. Did life evolve by abiogenesis without God? February 3rd, today, 2020. I take the position that I completely deny it could evolve by abiogenesis. There had to be a creator. In my seminars all over the world, I give the 6 different meanings of the word evolution because you have to define that word. It's too slippery. We talk about cosmic evolution, chemical, stellar, and organic, number 4. Now, for this debate, we're on, hang on. Excuse me, number 4. Could life get started without a God to do it? Have scientists created life in the laboratory? Or have they seen it happen in nature without any assistance? Has it just simply happened by itself? Well, from nationalpornographic.com, they said, if we look for the simplest creatures on the planet, we find a wee bacterium that lives happily in the digestive tracts of cows and goats. It has only 525 genes, the smallest genetic code, one of the simplest life forms we've ever seen. Well, this is, and even though it is considered by them a simple life form, it is incredibly complicated. The simplest life form, this wee little bacteria, is more complex than the space shuttle, the most complex machine ever built by man. So just because it is tiny and has only 525 genes does not mean it is simple or could happen by chance. The new theory of organic evolution, which is what you're talking about here, life beginning without a God telling it, how to get started. The purpose of this work and the words of the author is to test the common sense that Huxley says is science, from nature.com. Whether the Darwinian doctrine that evolution of life on our planet was brought about by natural selection. Okay, let's test it. You admitted several times, Ken, it has not been demonstrated, it has not been proven, therefore it is not part of science. You keep referring to the Bible as magic. What you are referring to is the magic. Since it's not observed, it's never been tested or demonstrated. Science deals with things we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. That's the standard definition in any textbook. Science, well, we observe. So the idea of the origin of life is completely outside the field of science. Whether God did it or whether it happened by abiogenesis, they're both outside the field of science. Therefore, we should not all be forced to pay for that religion because it's a religious belief. You believe it happened, but it's not science. Why do all people have to pay for your religion to be taught in all the schools? That's where the problem comes in. I just Googled theories of origin, evolution, explains origin of life. Can they do it? All of them say, no, we can't do it. Nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organize themselves into the first living cell. Davies was described one of the best science writers on either side of the Atlantic. Primordial soup. Wikipedia says it just happened. In 1924, Operin proposed a theory that the chemicals got together in a primordial soup. And this is what is taught in the schools, and I object to this. This is not science. This is a religious belief, and you're welcome to believe that. And I would defend your right to believe that. Even though I think your belief is dumb, I would defend your right to believe it. But I do not think you have the right to force that on every kid as if it has been proven. Primordial soup, they start off saying Earth had a chemically reducing atmosphere. That is ludicrous. Earth has always had oxygen. The atmosphere was exposed to energy. This is the magic ingredient you guys always put in. You get a bunch of soup together and you add energy somehow, lightning strikes or whatever. Where's this energy? Where's the energy source coming from? Where's the energy coming from? Where's the matter coming from? Where's the time coming from for this to happen? You mentioned about waiting a long time, billions of years or something like that. That's precisely why it is not science. It's not observed and tested and demonstrated. So complex organic polymers, life developed in the soup. This is what the textbooks teach the kids. I have how many textbooks beside me here? A couple of hundred of them, biology, earth science, physical science. It was once thought that appreciable amounts of molecular oxygen were present in the prebiotic atmosphere, which would have caused some problems. Oxidation. And I've got plenty of material on this. Watch my video number 4, where I cover all this in great detail. Let me get up to where I want to go here. Okay. When Earth first formed, it was a solid ball of molten rock with no atmosphere. As the Earth began to cool and the crust and mantle began to harden, material from the inner regions would sometimes erupt through the surface, bringing hot gases. So the Earth started as a ball of rock, molten ball of rock, okay? Then as the rock cooled, some 4 billion years ago, the outside hardened and formed a crust. The mantle is still cooling down. Now, I agree the mantle's still cooling down. I do not agree with the 4 billion year part. 4.1 billion years ago, the Earth's surface or crust began to cool and stabilize, creating the solid surface with its rocky terrain. And then clouds formed as it cooled, and it began to rain. Rained and rained and rained and rained for millions of years. Just as species are believed to have evolved over time, the individual molecules are also likely developed in response to natural selection. So chemical compounds in a primitive soup somehow sparked to life. Well, now that's real science. Somehow it happened. You call the Bible magic. Ken, what you believe is magic. Poof. Lightning created it out of non-living material. By studying the evolution of not just life, but life's building blocks, that would be the chemicals, Researchers hope to come closer to the answer. Okay, I hope they do come closer. But until then, it's not science. The molecules swimming in the Earth's early primordial soup would have been continually destroyed by ultraviolet radiation. Certain pairs combined, they form a larger compound. This is all the propaganda of how life got started. But basically, to summarize, there was a hot ball of rock formed when the Earth cooled down. It rained on the rocks for millions of years, turned them into soup, and the soup came alive. This is the theory. This is not science. This has certainly never been observed. There's plenty of soup in the world today and plenty of laboratories. Let's see it happen again. Do it where we can watch it this time. A prebiotic soup. So, evaluating all chemical scenarios due to its nature, the origin of life must have been a very local event. Let me translate that for you. It only happened once, long ago and far away. We can't find the spot. We can't do it again, but we really, really, really believe it happened. That's why it's a religious belief. So have they created life in the laboratory? Absolutely no. They have not come close. There are many good videotapes on that. James Tour has done a whole series, The Mystery of the Origin of Life. Life has not been explained. The origin of life theories, he destroys all of them. Watch the James Tour videos if you'd like to get more on that. Genesis clearly claims God said he made the living creatures that moved on the earth. He made all the living creatures, every winged fowl, Genesis 1. God said, let the earth bring forth the living creatures. Now, for God to take natural material like rocks and earth and dust and create life, that is very different than what you believe, which is the dust created life by itself. I could point out this computer is made of 100% natural parts. These are things you can find on Earth. None of the parts of this computer came from outer space. It is made 100% from natural, or sometimes organized chemicals like plastics and things, but they're all based on the 92 elements, everything in that computer. But there isn't one person with half a brain cell that would say that happened by chance. It's true, intelligent man can take molecules out of the dirt and make a computer. It is not true that the computer can make itself given trillions of years. So it is true that God can make man. It is not true that the life can come from non-living material by itself, which is what you guys believe. God claims over and over that he created life. God created man in his own image, Genesis 1:27. God saw everything that he had made, and it was very good, Genesis 1. The Lord formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. That's what it says. The birds behind me are an example of a life form. If you think that happened by chance over billions of years, you need serious psychological evaluation. Deuteronomy. See now that I, even I, am he. There is no God with me. I kill, I make alive. God is claiming that he did it. Nehemiah chapter 9. Thou, even thou art Lord alone. Thou hast made the heaven with all their host, all that is therein. God claims he did it. Acts chapter 17. God that made the world and all things therein, he giveth to all life and breath and all things. 1 Timothy 6, I give thee charge in the sight of God who quickeneth all things. Quicken, an old English word that means to make alive. You bite your fingernail down into the quick, the living part. So God is claiming he did it. So have scientists made life in the lab? They are nowhere close to making life in the lab. If they did, that would only prove it takes intelligence to make life. It would not prove evolution. And God claims clearly in his word that he did it. Now, if you choose not to believe this book, that is completely your choice, okay? You can believe whatever you want to believe. I have chosen to believe it, and it has proven itself true over and over to me, but I'm not requiring everybody to pay for that to be taught. You guys want to require for your religion to be taught, and it is indeed a religious belief. Until scientists can prove that life formed by chance without God, they should admit that this is the vital first step of getting life started, is believed, capital B, believed to have happened, and they should admit it's a religion, and they should not allow it to be taught in publicly funded schools, TV channels, museums, science centers, etc. It has nothing whatsoever to do with science. So if you choose to believe that, great. Walt Brown said, evolutionists argue against design using arguments they designed. And you're very busy, Ken, trying to design experiments to make life happen by itself. Think about that for 5 minutes. There's a great book called Darwin's Black Box by Michael Behe, professor of biochemistry at Lehigh University. He said, complex living systems cannot possibly evolve piece by piece. He just takes the flagellum, the little hair on a bacteria. Bacteria are extremely tiny. The skin around the bacteria is really, really thin. It contains a motor which turns a hair called a flagellum. That little motor is so tiny, 8 million of them would fit on the stump of a human hair. Take a hair off, cut it off, 8 million motors fit on the stump. That little motor turns 100,000 RPM. It can stop in a quarter turn and reverse and make the bacteria back up. To go from 100,000 RPM to 0 in a quarter turn and then reverse is stunning. As things get smaller, the fluid they move through feels thicker. A swimming bacteria swimming through water is like a person swimming through peanut butter at 60 miles an hour. This is the flagellum on a bacteria. One little motor, 50 parts to it, that turns the hair. If you want to believe that, we have a model of it in our science center. If you want to believe that happened by chance, you're welcome to believe that, but don't call it science, and don't make everybody pay to have it taught, and don't get upset when people like me get upset that you're using tax dollars to spread your religion. I think that's completely unfair and certainly unscientific. This textbook says humans probably evolved from bacteria more than 4 billion years ago. Well, man, we need to sign them up for the Olympics. The bacteria can swim 60 miles an hour through their little world. So we are not getting close. This is lie number 35 out of my 75 lies in the textbooks that I cover on my series. So, Ken, I appreciate you doing this. Your job is to defend the thesis or the premise that life can happen by abiogenesis without God. All I've heard you do so far is admit that it can't, that we can't do it yet. And you keep saying, we may find one someday. Who knows what sort of ribosomes might be found in the future. Okay, you have great faith. I admire your faith. But I want you to understand, we haven't found anything about life starting from non-living material. It's not science. You teach science, for heaven's sakes. Don't teach kids. Just simply say, we don't know, we can't talk about that topic. Now let's get back to the science we do know. In biology, you could teach the kids all the muscles, the biceps, triceps, flexors, extenders, masseter muscle, frontalis muscle. You could teach them all the bones, all the organs, all the functions. You do not have to include origins in that topic. No medical doctor on the planet cares about evolution when he's doing surgery. He better know his anatomy. How it got there doesn't matter. This is how it is. When you break your bone, you want a doctor that knows how to put the bone back together, right, so it heals correctly. I've broken 9 of them. So I think evolution, even if it's true, it has not been proven yet, so it's not part of science. Even if it turns out later to be proven, it should not be taught at taxpayer expense. I think it's the most ridiculous waste of classroom time we've ever come up with to dumb down our kids. So you said all sorts of things I would like to respond to, but you kept referring to God said it, so therefore it's magic. Ken, you are the one who believes in magic. You do. I don't require mine to be taught. You're the guy who believes life just magically got started. And then this first single life cell, how did it become all these thousands of different kinds of animals? How did this amoeba become an elephant or a whale or a giraffe? That's not science. We never observe anything other than dogs produce dogs, cows produce cows. There are no exceptions. A couple of comments you made, and I want to make real quick and then let you have the floor. Life made up of ground up rock. I agree. And you say, God made it out of the dust. I agree. But for God to make it from the dust is very different than for the dust to make it itself, which is what you believe, with no designer. The dust just formed in a puddle, in a pond, in soup. You said the biblical account cannot be falsified or tested, so therefore it's using magic. Your account cannot be falsified or tested either. Every time they've tried to test it, the tests have failed. You cannot make life. You never made life. It's a failure. It's not science. So you're the one who believes in the magic. You said, I don't know. All known life is chemistry. I agree. So there might have been a designer to design the chemistry. All the known functions of the computer are purely electronic. There's no magic about how a computer works, but it took a designer. There's nothing magic about how living things function, but it took a designer. One cell's more complicated than the space shuttle. So I stand my ground that you are wrong. You lost the debate. You have not proven how abiogenesis is part of science or could make life. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, well, there was a lot in there.
I agree.
And most of it had nothing to do with abiogenesis, which is the subject that we're supposed to be discussing. Evolution is a a subject which is well worth having a lot of discussion about and a lot of debate about. And it's not what we're here to do today. We're here to talk about abiogenesis, how life could have potentially arisen from complex chemistry. Now, you made a lot of points about things being taught in schools. I teach school children, and school children are not taught that abiogenesis is a fact. They are taught that it is one explanation, one potential explanation for how life arose. Now, that may be different in the States, and they may be taught that it's an established fact, but they're certainly not taught that in the UK. They are taught that evolution is as close to a proven fact as it's possible to get in science, and if we were to ever debate evolution, then I'd be quite happy to go down that road with you. But the question today is abiogenesis, and whether studying abiogenesis is a better route to the truth. That truth could, I don't think it's very likely, but it could be your biblical account. It could be one of the other religions' accounts of creations. But how do you establish whether the Bible's account is true, or whether an account from some other religion is true, or whether the scientists' suspicions that life arose from complex chemistry is true? The only way to find out whether abiogenesis actually happened is to study it. And it is a far better route to the truth, because your book cannot be challenged. Your book cannot be questioned. God seems to have gone completely silent since 2,000 years ago. There are a lot of misrepresentations of what science is and what science does. A lot of calling science a religion. You kept saying, I believe this, I believe that. You have no idea what I believe. And I thought I made it pretty clear in my initial presentation that I take a true scientist's approach to things, which is I wait for sufficient evidence to accumulate that it becomes unreasonable not to believe something. Now, I personally don't think we're there with abiogenesis yet. In fact, we're a long way short of it. As far as evolution is concerned, I think we are there. And maybe one day we'll discuss that, and we'll look at some of the evidence involved. There are a number of facts that you mentioned that I think are completely bonkers, like the UV radiation destroying all the molecules. Well, that's fine. It would destroy molecules on the surface, but it wouldn't destroy molecules that are, for example, being produced in a deep sea hydrothermal vents. For example, one of the potential places where life might have originated, and where those chemicals might well have been synthesized, even if life originated somewhere else once those chemicals had reached that other location. So I think it would be a really, really good idea if you stopped misrepresenting science and stopped stating things as fact that are not, either not fact or have other alternative explanations. And let's stick to the subject of today's debate, which is abiogenesis a better explanation than the Book of Genesis? I would actually say at the moment, only slightly, but at least it's going somewhere, because the Book of Genesis really tells us nothing. And I don't want to go on. I don't want to go on really anymore. The other sections from the Bible that you mentioned are, I wanted to stick to the Book of Genesis because that's where the creation account is written. Whatever's written after that is really looking back at the Book of Genesis and then, saying what the Book of Genesis says and embellishing it and changing it somewhat. So I don't think that's a valid line to go down. That's why I wanted to stick to the book of Genesis.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Oh, are we on here, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay, get my slides back up if you would. Okay. You mentioned you want to stick with abiogenesis. I thought that's what I did. I went through all sorts of quotes about how scientists have shown it cannot be made to happen in the laboratory yet. It's never been observed to happen. And they do teach that it did happen. It's not like, maybe in your schools, you have the extreme rare possibility that your schools are not teaching it like fact, but the American schools are teaching it as if it is some kind of fact and you don't dare question it. Here we have, let's see, from Live Science senior writer who wrote, just as species are believed to have evolved over time, the individual molecules that form the basis of life also likely develop. Now this is teaching it as a possibility. This is reasonable.
Yeah.
How about this one though? Life on Earth first bloomed 3.7 billion years ago when chemical compounds in a primordial soup somehow sparked to life. Well, they're saying it happened. They're not sure how it happened, but they're saying it did happen. This is teaching it as a fact. This is not a fact.
Ken, can I just interrupt? I don't want to interrupt in your rebuttal, but that actually doesn't say anything about abiogenesis happening. It says that scientists think that the primordial soup somehow sparked into life. That could have been God doing that, or something else.
Okay, well, I have the textbooks beside me, and I could show you hundreds of quotes. They do teach it did happen, but we're not sure how. That's very different than saying we're not sure if it happened. And you mentioned about, let's see, how do you establish the Bible account is true? Well, 10 times in the first 7 chapters of the Bible, 10 different times, God said they will bring forth after their kind. The plants will bring forth after their kind. The animals will bring forth after their kind. The insects will bring forth after their kind. Well, we can test that scientifically. Can you give me any examples where any plant or animal has ever brought forth offspring that are not the same kind as the parents? Cows produce cows, apples produce apples, grass grows grass. You take the seed from a potato, it's going to grow a potato. There are no exceptions, none. So if you choose to believe that the potato and the whale have a common ancestor, you're welcome to believe that, but that's a religious belief. It is not supported by science. Genesis says they will always bring forth after their kind. That's testable. Ken, show me an example. That's a testable statement. This book says that
evolution, Kent, not abiogenesis.
Okay. Well, you said Genesis, if the Genesis account is true, it is testable about of Genesis. Abiogenesis, I agree.
Of origin of life, yeah.
It is not testable to show that God did it. It is not testable to show that it did it by itself out of chemical soup. The whole topic should not be involved in science class. Just like discussing how to build a sandbox should not be taught in a computer class. And discussing how to build a porcelain coffee cup should not be taught in an avionics class. Okay? Discussing abiogenesis and the origin of life should not be taught in any science class. It is not part of science. It's a religion that believes in magic. You're the one who's the magician. So you said the book cannot be questioned. It's the evolution theory that cannot be questioned. You said God is silent for 2,000 years. Well, I talk to him all the time. I don't think he's silent, but I think if God speaks once and writes it down, like your parliament in Scotland, they pass laws, they write it down, and then they're silent. It's settled. This is the law. It's done. You don't need to talk about it over and over again. It's settled. That's the law. So God wrote his book. It is settled. It's never been contradicted, never been proven wrong. What else is there to say? And you said, I'm calling science a religion. You are misrepresenting me completely, Ken. I call abiogenesis a religion. I call evolution a religion. I do not call science a religion. I never have. You're trying to include abiogenesis as part of science.
That's fair enough.
I've never called science a religion. Go ahead.
No, I'll take that back. It's fair enough. If you meant abiogenesis and I misunderstood, that's absolutely fine. You know.
Okay. I point out, Ken, that rat poison is 99.9% good food and a very tiny percentage of poison. They're thoroughly mixed together. The rat thinks he's getting free food. He's actually getting poisoned and doesn't know it. There's a lot of good science in the science books. I am not against science. I love science. We have a science center here in Lenox, Alabama. We teach kids real science. We like science. Science is things we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. I think we can observe the velocity that gravity attracts things, 9.8 meters per second, or 32 feet per second, whichever system you're on. I think we can observe a lot of things. We can observe the expansion of different metals, the coefficient of thermal expansion or linear expansion. I taught physical science for years in biology. I love science, but evolution and origins, period, is not part of science. You should not teach how to make coffee cups in a class on how to learn to fly an airplane, and you should not teach evolution or abiogenesis in a science class. You teach science. Kids, this is the mandible. This is the temporal mandibular joint. This is the temporalis muscle. You can learn all the biology and never talk about origins. It's unrelated to the topic. It's counterproductive. It's wasting time and money and violating the freedom of most countries have of separating state from church. It's not the state's job to promote a particular religion, except in Muslim countries. We should not be promoting the evolution religion in a science class. It's not part of science. Two more things here. You said that I was wrong about UV radiation destroying. It would only destroy the surface molecules. You said it might have been down deep that it happened. Again, this is a clear demonstration of your religious belief. You believe it might have happened. You can believe it happened on the moon and got brought here by a dust particle or asteroid. But that's not science. That's my point. And you said I should stop misrepresenting science. I am not the one misrepresenting science. Science is what we can observe, study, and test. Evolution isn't part of it. So by me careful, beer is often sold at football games. Beer has nothing to do with football. And beer does not ever become athletic by association with football. And you might have had it sold at your football games for the last 400 years. I'm sorry, it's not part of football. And evolution is not part of science. I'm not misrepresenting science. I'm trying to filter out the poison from the good food. Go ahead.
Can we please stop dragging evolution into this debate? I've only got another 15 minutes. I have to leave at 11. I've got to go and collect my wife from the airport.
No problem. You tell me how life got started without a designer.
Hang on. I want to deal with some of the points that you did make there. You say abiogenesis should not be taught in science class. Okay. Now, I would agree it should not be taught as fact. But my point is not whether it should be taught in school or whether it should be taught in science class. My point is whether it should be studied, whether it should be investigated, whether scientists should explore this possibility, and whether exploring this possibility provides a route to the truth or not. Now, would you not concede that scientists should attempt to study and attempt to find out whether abiogenesis is possible, whether it could have happened on the early Earth, no matter how long ago that happened to be?
If the parents want that taught to their kids, that's their option. Should the students study the origin of an ink pen and say, well, it could have happened by chance or it could have had a designer? Let's look at both options. But you guys want to exclude the idea that maybe God did it. You want yours taught only. You don't want God as an option. Are the kids in Scotland taught that maybe God created it in 6 days? Are they taught that in public schools? I think he's muted.
I asked about scientists. Sorry, there's a message in from my wife. I asked about scientists studying and trying to carry out experiments to discover whether abiogenesis A is a possibility, B could have happened on the early Earth. Nothing about children being taught this subject in schools.
Okay.
I've already explained that in Scotland they are taught it as a possibility, and you even put a quote up from one of your books that says it's put in those sorts of terms. Any science teacher worth their salt will not teach abiogenesis as even close to being a fact. Evolution's a different matter, and I'm happy to debate evolution with you or discuss evolution with you at some point, and we can talk about whether the evidence is there for that or not. Should scientists study and attempt to find out whether abiogenesis is possible or not?
If that's what the teachers, if that's what the parents want their kids to be taught.
I asked about scientists, not teachers and
Okay.
schools.
Okay, do the scientists also teach there's other options? Might have happened by chance, or maybe there was a designer that did it. If I required you to explain how this ink pen came to be, but you're not allowed to use man as your answer, I think I've kind of limited the options at the beginning. In Scotland, are you limiting the options the kids are exposed to by only showing them it might have happened by abiogenesis and then stop there? Or do they say,
well, let's take your pen. Let's take your pen. We can explain exactly how man makes a pen. We can, and you used a computer earlier on. We can explain exactly how man makes computers with the aid of other computers and machines.
Sure.
We cannot explain at all how God, according to the Genesis account, created life. And as I pointed out, even the Genesis account ignores vast swathes of life on earth and doesn't mention it, which does kind of tend to hint that the people who wrote it were ignorant, as you might imagine, of microbial life, microscopic life, and so on, and not even know that conifers and ginkgos are completely different taxonomic class to flowering plants, which are the only ones mentioned.
Well, the fact that Genesis doesn't mention every single kind of life form is a ludicrous argument. Of course, it doesn't.
It
bet your
doesn't
science
even
class
say it created everything. It doesn't mention microscopic life at all.
Well, it mentions all the creeping things.
Whales and cattle, but it doesn't mention microscopic life.
And so your argument is the argument from silence because it doesn't mention ABC, therefore the whole story is not true, which I think wouldn't hold up 2 seconds.
No, I didn't. I never said it wasn't true. Oh, couldn't be true. I just said it doesn't provide anything that anybody can sort of test or study or look at. There's no way of verifying it at all, and it does depend. It does depend on the supernatural or on magic, whereas man making a computer does not. And so if you can only explain something, by magic, then it certainly doesn't belong in the science class. Now, the chemistry behind abiogenesis does belong in the science class, and studying abiogenesis as a possible explanation for life on Earth definitely belongs in university research labs, and asking these questions. Well, how did life originate on Earth? That's what scientists do. And then they go away, and they're far cleverer than me, go away and work out really, really clever ways to find out how and why these things might have happened, could have happened, and eventually maybe come up with a solution. And you made the point that if scientists make life, it only proves that scientists can make life. It doesn't prove that life can arise naturally. And that's a perfectly fair and valid point. But it would prove you don't need magic. You don't need the supernatural.
All right, a couple of thoughts here. If two computers are arguing with each other over the internet, the computers can talk to each other. They're arguing, does man exist? They cannot see us. They have no proof of our existence. They can only see electronic things and bits and dots, and that they would never get to the answer. They can't possibly understand. So here we have two humans arguing about, does God exist? Did God create life? He claims he did. He wrote a book and says he did, and a lot of people believe that, which is fine. I'm not asking it for it to be taught, though. Question: should science, if the scientists want to study origin of life, abiogenesis, that's fine. Do they want me to pay for their study? What if I object to paying for that? I think it's a waste of time. Do the people of Scotland have the right to say, look, we don't want our money going for this pursuit? What if the scientists decided they wanted to study the existence of UFOs or Loch Ness Monster right there in your country? If they decide we want to...
Scientists have actually looked for the Loch Ness Monster, and they managed to raise enough money to do it.
Did they raise the money?
And they didn't find it. They found a bit of wood floating in the water, which they got fooled by at one point, but yeah.
My point is, that's a different story. Was it tax funded or was it volunteer donation?
I don't know whether that was privately funded
Now,
or not.
if you want to raise volunteer donations to study the origin of life, please do. But they can't do that.
Don't
they
you think
require everybody to pay for it.
Don't you think studying the origin of life could lead to other scientific discoveries? In fact, it already has led to other discoveries that are beneficial. People don't do science, sort of purely with one specific goal in mind, and we're only going to look for that and so on. Things happen serendipitously in science all the time. Penicillin being the classic example. I mean, surely the better way to truth is to actually investigate and study and do the science and appreciate the science and accurately respond to that science, rather than dismiss it and claim that it is all irrelevant. And talking about abiogenesis now, just a religion that you're teaching a religious belief to people instead of teaching proper science to them. People who study abiogenesis are damn good scientists. They do damn good science. Have you read any of their work?
I love science. I read lots of science stuff. So far, all the science tells us they've not been able to make life. Life is way too complicated. It is not possible to explain how this ink pen could come about by lightning striking a plastic factory. It's just not possible.
And there you go, misrepresenting science again. Nobody says that life originated from lightning striking a puddle. Okay, that's a complete misrepresentation of the scientific hypothesis of abiogenesis.
Okay, since you have taught science for many years and still tutor students on science, would you please tell the audience, how did life get started?
I don't know. I said that in my original presentation.
I know you did, and I appreciate that. The textbooks say it did get started in a puddle someplace. They just don't know how.
Well, and I've yet to see a text that actually says that in such a blatant way. That's a misrepresentation of how science is taught, or at least it's certainly a misrepresentation of how I teach science and how science ought to be taught. There is always room in science for somebody to say, we think this happened. There's a small chance it happened in some other way, or something else caused it. And scientists should never ever say something is proven absolutely 100%, but sometimes we get pretty damn close to it.
Well, if scientists want to use their own money out of their own pocket to study origin of life, or to study Loch Ness Monster, or to study UFOs, or to study magic, I don't care. My objection is, and will always be, I object to them calling it science, since it's not. It's part of a religious belief. Until it is proven, it's not science. Science is what we can observe. What we observe is bacteria produce bacteria. We do not observe ponds producing bacteria. It's not science. I'm sorry, it's not part of science.
That's a complete misrepresentation of what people who are studying this subject are actually doing. Okay, and you do this all the time. You misrepresent the position of science because I think you find it threatening to your religion.
Oh, I'm not threatened by science at all. My religion says clearly that animals and plants will always bring forth after their kind. That's all anybody's observed.
You know the theory of evolution says that as well, don't you?
Well, then, did a whale come from an amoeba? Is an amoeba the whale kind? Didn't somehow, somewhere along the line, the amoeba became something other than an amoeba to turn into a whale and a giraffe and a pine tree? You do not believe they bring forth after their kind.
No, you believe they absolutely. Evolution says that every animal will the offspring of that animal or that plant will be essentially the same as their parents.
You are completely mistaken, sir. You don't know what you're talking.
But with small differences.
An amoeba turned to a whale. An amoeba
no, it doesn't say an amoeba
real.
Turned into a whale. Only over a huge number of steps of tiny incremental steps. And to say things like an amoeba turned into a whale is to completely misrepresent evolution. And I don't want to get into a discussion about evolution, and I am going to have to leave, I'm afraid, to go and collect my wife.
Well,
and it's a foul night here.
Go ahead. Well, let's do it again anytime. Hey, come visit Lenox, Alabama. We'll give you a tour of our science center and let's have a discussion right here live.
I'd love to come over to the States, and I, out of pure curiosity, there are a couple of places that I would visit. Yours being one of them. And is it who's got the ARC thing? Is that Ken Ham?
Yes.
Somebody else. Yeah. But yeah, the thing that bothers me about the way that you approach this whole subject is to say things are patently absurd, like an amoeba turning into a whale. That is not what evolution says. And you say things like abiogenesis is a religious belief. It is not. Nobody knows whether abiogenesis happened. It is a subject, a scientific subject that is studied in the hope that we might be able to discover what life is, how life originated.
And you're welcome to do that.
If your God suddenly said, "Hey, Ken, this is how I did it," yeah, and could actually explain to me how he turned some dust into a fully fledged human being, then mature human being, then I would love to know. But I don't think that's ever likely to happen, and I don't think you think that's ever likely to happen either.
Okay, slide up for one more time, Steve. Okay, this textbook says a bacteria at the bottom of the tree slowly turned into a human. They do teach.
Yeah, but it says slowly. It says slowly. It does not say a bacteria turned into a human. And that's
so
what you said.
If I said
you said an amoeba turned into a whale, but hey ho.
If I said a Mary Poppins flew through the air slowly, it would be science. But if she flew through the air quickly, it would be magic.
No, if you're talking about Mary Poppins flying through the air, then you need to provide an explanation for how holding an umbrella can actually create sufficient lift to get a human being off the ground and propel them through the air. Science does not make the kind of statements that you claim that it does. And that's where I have a beef with the way that you argue these things. Now, unfortunately, because of time, we haven't got into any of the actual evidence that I wanted to be able to present to you. I thought that one of the things you might say is that information can't arise spontaneously without some sort of intelligence behind it. And I had lined up a little demonstration for how just as much information as is in an RNA molecule can arise purely randomly. But so I'd love to do that again sometime, and I would love to talk to you about evolution.
Sure.
I was going to look. I've got lined up some DNA and protein sequence homologies and all sorts of things to look at. However,
here is Arms and Camp biology book saying the protista turned to a human and a whale. They do teach this. I'm going to try to fix it in my country. They do teach it as a fact.
It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that they turned into a whale. It says that there were billions of years of tiny incremental changes that eventually did that. And I'm happy to talk to you because I think there are a couple of cracking examples in the animal world that you would find really difficult to fit into your kind of blinkered view of evolution.
Call 855 Big Dino extension 2. Schedule another debate, or come over here and sit right beside me. We'll do it live on my channel.
Well, if I do ever get across to Alabama, I would love to sit with you and actually talk for a few hours rather than this. And I do apologize, but I really do have to go just now.
Last thought. If you are wrong, and you die today on this trip with your wife, where are you going when you die?
If I'm wrong about what?
Well, if you died today on this trip to wherever you're going, where would you go when you die? Does life cease to exist for Ken, or is there more to life?
As far as I'm aware, what will happen is I will cease to exist, and that's that.
Okay, if you're happy with that.
I'm not particularly happy with it. It's not a great thought, and that's one of the reasons that religion was invented by man, to kind of get around that. That rather unpleasant thought. I lost my father. I lost my father just under 2 years ago, and it's still a difficult thing to live with. You know,
I understand.
People dying is not a good thing, but there's absolutely no reason to think that anything lives beyond. Have a think about my point that all life is just chemistry.
Okay.
If you can come up with any part of life that is not just chemistry. I notice you didn't attempt to answer that question. So
okay,
that answer.
All right.
All right.
See you, Judgment Day. Thank you. All right.